Hi, yes, I'm Kent Severson. I'm the Conservator at Shangri, Museum of Islamic Art, Design, and Culture in Honolulu, Hawaii. Why Honolulu? It's a long story, but that's another story. I've been associated with the Iraqi Institute for Conservation of Antiquities and Heritage since early in 2010, and I consider it a real privilege and an honor to have been selected to report on Nimrud Rescue. Okay, there we go. The site of Nimrud, to the south of Mosul and the west of Erbil, was an ancient palace site of the Assyrians, largely constructed during the reigns of King Ashurnasirpal II and his son Shalmaneser III in the mid-9th century BC. There have been archaeological excavations at this site since the mid-19th century, and we find sculptures from Nimrud in museums all over the world. British Museum, of course, Metropolitan Museum, Brooklyn Museum, there's one at Penn. They're very familiar sculptures. Many of the sculptures remained at the site, however, in a collection of protective and supporting structures that were built between the 1950s and the 1990s. Here you see the west gate of the Northwest Palace, and inside one of the protective structures with these remarkably well-preserved sculptures in this very sort of interesting collection of buildings. I think everyone worldwide was shocked early in 2015 as when we saw this 7-minute propaganda video from ISIS, which included images like this, bulldozing the sculptures from the west front of the Northwest Palace, these people pulling blocks off the walls, and then setting up these barrel bombs. When detonated, it looked like this. And again, from the other side, like this. Astounding. So this was the Northwest Palace before the destruction. You can see the collection of buildings. To the right, that arch, let's see if I can make this work, right there. That's the Northwest, or the West Gate and the East Gate. This before the destruction and after. Note that one piece of the West Gate still survives. Elsewhere around the site, this is the ziggurat and Ishtar temple. The ziggurat was bulldozed and then mined, and then this reconstructed, the reconstructed facade of the temple was largely destroyed. The Nabu temple, reconstructed in this photo, and you can see these two well-known sort of fish god sculptures, these iconic fish god sculptures, and after the destruction. And the fish god sculptures ended up sort of down here somewhere. So I'm next going to play a video that was prepared by the Smithsonian, talking a little bit more about how Nimrud Rescue developed and the relationship between the Smithsonian and the Nimrud Rescue project. Yeah, so Nimrud Rescue emerged out of a series of meetings starting early in 2017, largely spearheaded by Richard Curran, then the Smithsonian Acting Provost and Undersecretary for Museums and Research, together with representatives of the Iraq State Board of Antiquities and Heritage, UNESCO, and ICRAM. Follow-on agreements put together the team of Jesse and Brian, who you just heard from, along with Corey, who you know well, and Catherine Hansen, who will speak to you later today. This is the core team of Nimrud Rescue. And the action plan included leveraging the existing facilities and routines and team of master trainers at the Institute to expand into recovering Nimrud in particular, bringing in staffers from Nineveh Province, State Board of Antiquities and Heritage. I think ultimately we trained about 30 people. We were very fortunate to have a number of people, and two in particular, who had been trained and working at the Institute since 2010, Mr. Zaid and Mr. Saad, who were working in Nimrud back then. They're now key players in Nimrud Rescue. So yes, we did a lot of this training in a rubble-strewn field outside of Erbil, or near the edge of Erbil. I just wanted to mention a little bit about what's all this business with the strings and the, oh, that one's not working, with the strings and the flags and all this. The system that we're utilizing, and it's utilized in many places, you set out a grid over the debris field, and then you mark the various objects and document them. And by doing this and utilizing GPS and a lot of measurement, you can, tack these things down in three-dimensional space, and then when you pick them up, you have a record of where they came from. And it's a systematic collection of fragments that we're applying in Nimrud as well as other places. Yeah, that field was really terrific. It looked just like Nimrud, except there were big chunks of concrete. I was brought into the project in 2017, and finally, in September of 2018, we were able to make our first, after a second round of training, that is, we were able to make our first visit to the site of Nimrud. Now, seeing the conditions for the first time, it really, for me, was breathtaking. Here you have a view of the west gate of the Northwest Palace with a pile of colossal fragments that was pushed into place by bulldozers. And note that the east gate over here is largely demolished. It's a twisted mass of steel, concrete, rebar, limestone chunks, modern ancient mud bricks. Did I mention concrete chunks? There's lots of them, so I'll say it twice. The scale of the site is a little bit difficult to get your mind around. This, on the right, you see one of the images from a drone survey that was done by UNESCO after the destruction. That red square represents 50 square meters. And the entire space of the Northwest Palace is something like this. It's just a tangled mess, studded with pieces of inscription and ancient sculpture, partially buried, completely buried, exposed. Here's a pile of fragments with a tarp that has blown off. These were provided by UNESCO, and in spite of some concerns about condensation and abrasion, they continue to be of some use to us today, but you get a sense of what this looks like. And this is a detail of one of these pieces, and this is what the end looks like. When this stone is a kind of oleoliferous gypsum, and gypsum is moderately soluble in water. And when these things are exposed, this is what happens. They begin to erode very quickly. So when we arrived at the site in 2018 and saw this incredible debris field with the head of the king sticking out over here, and it really changed our thinking about what we needed to do at Nimrud, from simply collection. But it's going to take years to unpack this thing, decades. And we realized that we needed to also add on a component of reburial or temporary covering. So we put together a program of training, here using geotextile and modern mud bricks, which there are millions of them strewn around Nimrud that were used in previous reconstructions. Geotextile is a non-woven, the type that we're using is a non-woven, kind of felt-like material that will act as something of a silt barrier, but more important, when it goes into burial, even up against the sculptures, it'll be a horizon marker. So when people go back to excavate this site again in the future, they'll know, okay, there's sculptures here. And that's where we need to take care. So during that first visit, we were able to see, and much of the footage in the video was from that first visit, we were able to see the bones of the new storage structure, which was built on a pre-existing pad that was going to be used for a parking structure. Thankfully, so we didn't have to do a lot of, or they didn't have to do a lot of excavation to build this thing. There's another pad available. This is going to fill up very quickly. and another component that we've been grappling with was this question of unexploded ordnance and remnants of war, booby traps perhaps, that ISIS might have left at the site. We know that the ziggurat up here was mined, and it was cleared of mines by the Iraqi army, but we know virtually nothing about the rest of the site. This is a GPS walkover that one of our team members did, and people have been walking all over the site, fortunately without incident up till now. But we're hesitant to start moving big stones and really digging in until this can be properly evaluated. Thanks to the State Department, we may be moving ahead very shortly on getting this done. Right, so season 1 ran from November to December of 2018. And I like this image because you can sort of, it's almost like before and after, right? Not only were they picking up the gypsum fragments, cataloging their location, putting them in labeled bins, and putting them in the storage building, but also picking up the grounds, all the other debris around. Brian and I were fortunate enough to go back on the day in November when they collected the first systematic fragments from Nimrud. A very proud moment, and really sort of the culmination of all this training. By the end of that first session, they were lifting some very large pieces indeed, safely, cataloging them, wrapping them up, and putting them, photographs, of course, and storing them away in the new storage building. One of the things that happened in a road cut that ISIS did with a bulldozer through the soil near one of the temples, it exposed a previously unknown sculpture, and the guys went in and installed the geotextiles and mud brick protective device in October of that year. They also did some basic shoring on that push pile, and we had a meeting before that season where we came up with a kind of design for a dry-laid mud brick wall around the push pile that would lift up the coverings and provide some air circulation. Here, covered with geotextile, and then a tarp on top of that. Most moving, though, on the first anniversary of the liberation of Mosul, instead of taking a day off like the rest of the country, they went to work. That's dedication. So the second Nimrud Rescue session occurred between October and January, October last year and January of this year. Now it seems like kind of a big gap in time, but you have to remember that it's blazing hot in the summer and very difficult to work there. And also, this is the same team, essentially the same personnel, that are working in the Mosul Museum and are documenting many of the historic houses in Mosul. We were a little surprised when we arrived, Brian and I and Jesse, to find it very shaggy with overgrown nettles and things. But we were able, Brian in particular, was able to fly over a drone and make a brand new high-resolution mosaic image. You can even see how shaggy it is here, and there's the push pile in the middle. This diagram from the Iraqis' report on the season 2 shows the areas that have been cleared around the northern end of the Northwest Palace. The idea is to provide a perimeter so you can begin to bring in heavy equipment to try to pick this tangled mess apart. They did do work over here outside the fence on this slope where some fragments had been ejected by the blast. This diagram shows location of some of the covering operations they're doing. So here they are working on the clearing the slope. These people, they work very hard. They're very ingenious, doing a great job. Here are some of the covering operations. They also organize themselves to bring in the 2 fish god sculptures from the Nabu temple very safely and nicely using a crane and rigging that we taught them. And finally, they can bring in some machinery and start to collect this broken debris, the busted up cement and steel. And so that brings us to almost the present of how much work has been done at Nimrud. We just received a preliminary sketch of a third season, which will include addressing some erosion problems, continued clearing and covering, but also we need to, they're going to start looking at the engineering that's going to be needed to take apart this damaged structure and hopefully recover this one piece of relief which survived the attack and has come to be known as the survivor of Nimrud. So it's a big project. Many people involved, and many thanks to all the funders and the academic and other support that we've received along the way. Work like this requires cooperation between many agencies. And so there, I'll stop, and I think we have questions.